Welcome to the President's Dilemma, Leadership in the Workforce Revolution. I'm your host, Janice Liu, and on behalf of the organizing committee at Filling the Gap, I'd like to welcome you to the first of a series of events meant to broaden our understanding and challenge our thinking around applied AI, business, marketing, and technology. Before I begin, I'll announce some housekeeping. The bathrooms are by the door in which you entered. So if you have a hard time finding them, I can't help you, but they should be there. You have security passes that were given to you when you came in, so if you don't mind, at the end of the event, just drop off your security pass at the security door or the desk there. That would be great. As you can see, we have a lot of sound equipment, so we are setting this up to get recorded, and there is a photographer walking around. If you don't want to have your photo taken, please let them know. Otherwise, you might be in the video. Our panel discussion is going to begin shortly, and we will end the discussion around 10 a.m. to get you out of here, but we'll also open the floor up for some open networking. And if you're interested in learning more about the topics that we are discussing this fall, we will be emailing you through Luma with those event links, but some of our hosts from Intuit, which is the next event, are here as well. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We honor their stewardship and the many generations before us who have cared for this land. One teaching from the Indigenous traditions that align with the conversation we're about to have today is the principle of making decisions with 7 generations ahead in mind. It reminds us that true leadership is not only about solving today's challenges, but ensuring that our choices reverberate far into the future, shaping systems, communities, and opportunities for those yet to come. This is at the heart of why we're here, and in a moment you'll hear from these 3 leaders who are each navigating the workforce revolution in their own way, balancing disruption, responsibility, and legacy. I hope we carry the 7-generation mindset with us as we listen, reflect, and consider how our decisions today can create lasting impact for tomorrow. Before I introduce our moderator and speakers, I'd like to introduce the organization putting on this event, Filling the Gap. Filling the Gap is an organization that I co-founded over 10 years ago with several amazing women, some whom you have met while checking in. Filling the Gap empowers women in underrepresented communities by closing knowledge gaps and making essential skills accessible. We are especially proud that all of our proceeds from today's event support the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic, which we have been supporting in fundraising from the very beginning and now have raised close to $150,000 for them in the past 10 years. The Schleifer Clinic is a one-of-a-kind non-for-profit that provides legal aid, counseling, and interpretation services to women and gender-diverse people who have survived violence and domestic abuse. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to everyone, our partners, our sponsors, the amazing Loblaw digital team, and volunteers who helped make this event happen. Now, it's with great pleasure that I'll introduce you to the moderator of the event, Jake Hirsch-Allen. Jake is the head of partnerships at the DAIS, Canada's leading think tank, where he focuses on kids and tech, renewing democracy, and AI and the innovation economy. He advises impact investors, public sector leaders, and startups on responsible tech and ethical data. He's co-founded Lighthouse Labs and has been on several numerous boards. A former lawyer, he also taught global health at McMaster and clerked at the Supreme Court of Israel. Thank you, Jake, for coming. Our first speaker to my left is Cheesan Chew, the president of the Canadian Club. The Canadian Club is a non-profit organization that serves as a public forum for thought leaders in business, politics, and culture. Founded in 1897 to discuss Canadian affairs. Cheesan is an experienced executive of over 20 years leading innovation, building businesses, and advising organizations from startups to global corporations. She has held senior roles including the COO of RBC Ventures and co-founded Idea Couture. She continues to influence strategy and design through board leadership and advisory work today. Next to Cheesan is Stewart Lyons. Stewart is a tech and mobility executive with a track record of scaling and transforming companies in mobility, SaaS, telecom, and media. Currently, he is the co-CEO of Bird and Spin and founder and CEO of Bird Canada. Stewart previously led major growth and transformations at SiriusXM, TerraGo Networks, and Mobilicity with multiple exits. Stewart also serves on several boards, including FSRA, Metrolinx, and Borrowell, and has been recognized among Canada's top 40 under 40. Impressive. Lastly, we are joined by Christine Saunders, the CEO of Dentsu Media, one of the largest global agencies. Known for her pragmatic yet empathetic leadership, Christine has a proven track record in driving business growth. She leads cross-collaboration across clients, capabilities, and talent to deliver best-in-class brand and performance solutions. A well-connected industry veteran, she serves on the executive board of the Canadian Media Directors Council and frequently contributes to major conferences and award juries. So with that, let's give a big round of applause to our amazing panel.
All right, thanks all for coming. Thanks to Janice. We're going to keep this super informal. And in particular, I feel like it's even more family-like or intimate than one of these talks usually is, not just because of the size of the room and audience, but also because if I can go through a few of the folks who are in the audience that randomly I was connected to over the past few years, the most random connection right in the back is somebody who I shared an Uber share with many years ago. Wow. And just noticed in conversation with Janice that I was, from my name, one of the guys who added him on LinkedIn. I'm still working at LinkedIn while in the Uber, and we've remained connected ever since. There are folks who are hosting me for another talk on AI in a few weeks in the audience. There's a former colleague of mine from LinkedIn from many years ago. All sorts of people I had no idea would be here, and so it does really feel like a family, and so I'm grateful for that. And even, for instance, Cheesan and I were on a board for 6 years together. So I'm just super, super grateful to be surrounded by so many people who I respect and love. I'm going to have to read a little bit because our format is first rapid fire questions, and I couldn't memorize all of them, but hopefully we'll get your blood flowing, and certainly the blood of our fellow panelists by going as fast as I can. And then we're going to slow down a little and get into a little bit more depth with each on the areas that they know best. But let's start with the rapid fire. So when I was in undergrad, my favorite course was on time. And these days, time, in my opinion, is becoming even more interesting because of AI. It is sort of shrinking or telescoping and then expanding in ways that I'd never experienced. And at the other extreme, I've got a 1-year-old baby, and she is really influencing how I think about time as well, because it goes by so crazy fast when I'm with her and over the course of her lifetime. But then when I pull back, I realize that, like, work-wise, for instance, it's actually slowing down. And so again, there's this telescoping, for me at least. If we think about the commoditization of time and automation today, how has it changed how each of you think about time itself? Let's start with Christine.
Sure. I think it's ruined me because any delay is super frustrating. It makes me angry. I mean, last night I came home and, the consensus was to order pizza. We ordered pizza and they're like, it's gonna be 20 minutes. I'm like, what do you mean 20 minutes? Like, I need it now, right? Like, people are angry, like, I want pizza now. So, like, it's just, like, time, like, I just need to slow down.
The expectations.
So, expectations are just ridiculous and stupid, and I'm feeding into it. So,
I love that. I'm also gonna mention that the panelists are allowed to pass on these. We're going fast enough that they don't all have to answer every question. But Stewart, over to you.
You have the old cliche, you can't buy more time. Automation actually kind of changes that paradigm a little bit because you can actually create a little more time than you used to have, which is, you couldn't really create time for the longest time. And now you actually can find, so whether it's at your home, whether you're doing home automation or something in work or AI, whatever it is, but yeah, I mean, that's pretty crazy that now you can actually get more time than you never used to be able to.
And as somebody who always wants to pour a little cold water on sort of the impact of automation, is it not crazy that the most effective thing that AI can do is still turn on and off your lights? Like, I find that's one of the only things. If I yell at Google or Amazon or Siri, like, turning on and off the lights is the only thing that consistently works, which is sort of shocking 10 years, 15 years after they created these apps. But I agree, it does help me run up and down stairs and turn off all the lights in my house. Cheesan.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I totally feel both of those sort of mindsets and situations. But for me, it's made me far more intentional. When you've got the ability to sort of free yourself from some of the more mundane things that that take up time, you have a lot more space for that intentionality, creativity, the cognitive space to build on those things. And so, yeah, I love it.
I'm envious. I'm waiting for the automation to make me feel like I have more time, but I appreciate that. That's the goal.
Just cram more things into
Yeah,
it.
that is my problem. You're absolutely right. What do you spend the most time on in your life or in your role at work? You choose.
In my life, I feel like I spend most of my time picking up shoes and clutter in my house. We have not fixed. I am just keeping it real today, right? So I'd like some automation to pick up clutter in my house. And you're right, because the only thing that's automated in my house are the lights. And honestly, I mean, it's just flicking a switch too, right? So I don't know why it's automated, but we do it. In life, I think I spent in work. I feel like most of my day, there's so much, but connecting people, I think, is the biggest thing, right? It's just like, oh, you should talk to this person, or you need to talk to that person. So I feel like I'm always connecting and meeting new people and finding new resources and support for people.
I sort of those two, I love the second one in the sense that I think connecting with people and connecting people as somebody who's obsessed with networking, but also just because that's sort of a human, what is more innately human than communicating and connecting with other people is positive, and maybe that's it's good that we're having more of that. On the flip side,
It's a lost art, though. Like, I feel like people are just sending emails, so they're just bitching about things, right? And it's like, no, just go talk to them,
In
right?
person.
In person or on the phone, whatever's your jam, but talk. And I feel like that's
I love that. And then the flip side is who wants to be doing more laundry? Why have we not managed to automate laundry? And you can think about sort of the care economy, or sort of the amount of time that we actually put into spending with other people as, in my opinion, the most valuable thing, but certainly not the one we put the most time or money into, at least from a business perspective. And then flip that, and I love this idea that the most feminist invention in history was the dishwasher. And we don't think of that as automating, but the amount of time it saved predominantly women over the past century is shocking, and yet it took a really long time for us to adopt it, mostly because men were pushing back on bringing dishwashers into the house.
Yeah, except, we have lost the art of loading the dishwasher properly, right? Everybody in the room. My daughter is like a rabid raccoon when she puts the dishes in there. My son is very organized because he's a CPA, and he's very
I'm definitely on the
So I don't know if it saves us any time. And then I had a friend the other day, and I'm like, where's your dishwasher? And we're getting off topic, but we have time, I think.
It's true.
And she's like, oh no, I don't want a dishwasher. She's like, I like to slow down and do the dishes and put it away, and it's my me time, and I think and I create. I'm like, good for you.
So I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we're well off topic and ask Stewart a different question, unless you really want to answer the last one.
Go ahead.
Okay, so what is harder to change, tech or people?
Well, definitely people, I think, are harder to change. I think tech is easy to change. It's a function of typically time and money, but I think people is harder to change. Ironically, people can change if they want to, but sometimes they don't want to. But yeah, I think my experience, I'd say people.
This is actually why I think AI and automation are going to have a much slower impact on our economy than most people predict. In fact, if you look at the Nobel Prize winners this past year, those who were involved in the AI industry think it's going to have this crazy huge impact tomorrow. And those who understand people or the labor market think it's going to get slowed down by our inability to adopt, or just not wanting to adopt, or struggles with communicating with each other about adopting these new technologies.
Yeah, look at autonomous vehicles, which, was every year for the past, 5-6 years, Elon Musk has said, this year it's all, So, yeah.
Well, even in your area, the vehicles that sort of Bird runs in different cities have both overtaken transportation infrastructure in a really positive manner, allowing people to get around way faster. And, other cities have been banned because of whether it's injuries or like competing industries not wanting them to. I'm curious, like in your specific industry, how has the human antipathy to adopt new things impacted your growth?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird thing. So Toronto's a bit unique. Toronto has this weird approach, which is a bit, world different. But look, bicycles have been around for 100 years, so people are used to bicycles, whether it's an e-bike or a regular bicycle. The e-bike part has been pretty easy, so we do bikes all over the world as well as e-scooters. And e-bikes are never really an issue, but for some reason, when you change the form factor, you make the wheels a little smaller, change it a little bit, people get all like bent out of shape. And there's a lot of weird bias against e-scooters. I can't understand it entirely, but people have a weird thing. Yeah, and I think people need to approach it they're all the same. It's whether you're using an e-scooter or an e-bike or a bicycle or a kick scooter, whatever you're using, it's all the same. You're trying to get around on a two-wheel device. You should be wearing a helmet. You should be safe. And I think that's what we're really. So yeah, you're right. There's been some weird. Toronto is among the weirdest. I hate to say, but there are some weird attitudes towards a slight change in the form factor.
What's the city that's been the weirdest?
Probably Toronto. I'm not kidding. I'm in 250 cities, and I'm from here. I was born here. I still live here, and our company is now based here. And this is the one that gives us the biggest trouble. It's unbelievable. It's classic Canada, I guess.
100%. Yeah. As somebody who bicycles, like diehard bicyclist, and almost died 3.5 weeks ago, spent a week in the hospital with a collapsed lung because somebody adored me, and then was back on my bike and biked here today, I totally appreciate how weird and messed up Toronto's transportation infrastructure is.
Look, the whole point is you're trying to remove vehicle trips from the road, right? And, things like Uber and Lyft, they actually add more vehicle trips. People don't realize that, because it's not when you guys are taking a ride, it's when that driver is driving around looking for the next ride. So they actually create more traffic. So for all the bad, traffic, whether you're, environmentalist or not, traffic is a problem. If you're not environmentalist, then you don't like to be stuck in traffic and you're just slowing down your economy. If you are an environmentalist, then it's kind of obvious it's creating all kinds of other problems. So, and they're not building more roads, and I'm on the board of Metrolinx, and I can tell you that building subways is extremely complicated, and we can talk about roads across town separately, separate topic. I wasn't on the board, by the way, for all that part. I've only been on the board recently. But, anyways, separate issues. But it's you need to get people around, and cities aren't adding more streets, and you have to do this. Like, it's not like it's a crazy thing. Anyways, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. I'm sure other people have other things.
I would love to have a conversation on how we make our roads more bike-friendly, scooter-friendly, less car-friendly. Let's have that conversation.
If anyone's been to London, England recently, you can see they went from pretty much a car to culture to hardcore bicycles. Their bicycle situation there is crazy out of control. And that's because they wanted to do it. And same with Paris. In Europe, it's obviously much more common than North America.
A anonymous government relations firm asked me this week, to look into a congestion tax in Toronto. And it was somebody on sort of the far right of the Toronto political spectrum, whatever that means, who was suggesting that this was an idea that they wanted sort of to get injected into the debate for, again, whatever reason. So curious if you all have views on congestion taxes. Now we're really off topic. And so much for speeding through this, right?
This is what?
If you look at how Singapore automates its vehicle movement, which is getting back to AI, it is remarkable how their congestion taxes literally are based on where in the city you are at a given second and how much traffic is on that road in that instant. And I think that's the kind of real-time
Do you want to
automation.
get into taxes now? Don't we pay enough taxes?
Yeah, we'll forget the taxes bit, but more how smart cities were supposed to work in our dreams, the way that, as you said, self-driving cars were supposed to work in our dreams. Some cities actually are already there.
So many great examples.
So, Cheesan, I'm going to go to the next one because this is the opposite of rapid fire. When do people matter more than efficiency?
People matter the most. Let's just put that out there. And they matter more when you're trying to build trust, and you're building culture, and you're building resilience. They matter when you're just trying to build. right? I think if you are thinking about sort of efficiency, technology, they matter when you're scaling, when you have to repeat things, but life doesn't repeat itself. Right? I think part of the problem, leaders often face is trying to figure out when you privilege one over the other. But if you were to ask me, I mean, it was people all the way down, all of those questions. And so you can't really do anything without people, and you don't really have humanity without people. So.
Great answer. I had this remarkable opportunity to host Hinton for a dinner, Jeffrey Hinton, one of the sort of godfathers of AI, about 6 months ago. And the remarkable thing after going to the dinner from his talk was everybody else took an Uber and he insisted on taking public transit. And so I was on my bike next to the streetcar. He was wearing my daughter's hat, if I remember correctly. I have a tiny head, it fit on my head, it did not fit on his head, but he was cold. And his line when he got off, because I asked about why he did it, was he trusts public transit more than he trusts the Uber driver. And he tied it back to AI. And I thought this is still, for me, very, very important, which is as we can generate more and more content, the hardest part is going to be distinguishing what's made by us. And we're not going to be able to determine what's fake in the future, but we can determine what's made by us. I think that's a really interesting contrast.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, the creativity that comes from a human being is, I know technology, oh, look at that. Oh, yeah, I mean, I know technology is, it's amazing, right? Like what we can do with agents and GPTs and all of it is really, but there's something about drawing a picture in a sketchbook. There is something about a paintbrush, there's something about writing, there's just something about creating as human beings that is just, it's not comparable. It's the experience of doing it that is the core.
100%, like holding a real book and smelling its pages or shaking someone's hand. We're gonna wrap the rapid fire in 2 more questions, but for you all, think if there are any of the questions you didn't answer that you want to, please jump in. We'll go back to Christine. What's one thing you never automate, no matter the ROI?
I mean, I was trying to think of an answer last night, and I'm not sure there's anything really I wouldn't have some sort of automation to. I mean, there's relationships, but even then, if you really think about it, like, we stay connected through Facebook and through other automation platforms, right? So that's not really true. Negotiations, I would like to say, because I like to, sort of look at people in the eyes when I'm negotiating, but, there's platforms that help enable it. So I'm not sure there's really anything off the table, but I think it's that, that it's additive versus taking something completely away from the human connection.
I was going to say like parenting, I wouldn't want to automate, but then I was like potty training, I might want to automate.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but you've got like monitors, right? And there's lots of automation in your life. The lights, the night light.
Absolutely. Stewart, last one. How are you retraining or repurposing talent versus cutting jobs? And I say this as somebody who for a decade sold LinkedIn's online learning platform. And even before that, built a boot camp and sort of have been thinking about EdTech forever. And we're in the country that does the worst on-the-job training in the world, certainly the developed world. So how do you do that differently within your company?
It's a great question. I mean, we haven't, look, AI is still pretty new. We use AI in a few areas. We use it in coding. We use it, we've experimented using it in customer service. That's always a tricky thing. And we use it with we have a big software package that we use to determine where to put vehicles. So based on where the last trips were taken, event data, weather, things like that. And we have it all in a big LLM that is done via with smarter people than me that figure out exactly how to translate that into where we should put vehicles. So we haven't cut any jobs yet. I say yet because you're assuming that when you're talking about we have a lot of coders and a lot of software engineers. So I'm assuming that at some point one guy can do more work than 2 people or 3 people or whatever. So we haven't done anything yet, and we haven't repurposed anybody. But look, in my business, there is a lot of human aspects to it that I don't think will be replaced by AI that quickly. There's also a lot of physical components to it. You're physically, there's a blue collar aspect where you're physically moving around vehicles. You're charging batteries and swapping them, and that physicality, isn't happening anytime soon. And then there's a big part of our job where we speak to cities, because that's our customers at the end of the day is, the cities, and that really isn't, there's not really an AI element to that. So for our particular business, there's only a couple elements I think that might be, related, cutting jobs at some point, but today we've only added folks, not taken away.
Yeah, I love that. I think if you look at most technological revolutions, in most cases, say in the past 150, 200 years, we talked about automation, right? The railroad was the automation of horse-driven vehicles. And in almost every case, we created more jobs. My favorite example is from this guy, Benedict Evans, of calculators. Like, the accountants thought, there's a few folks from Intuit here, accountants were certain that calculators were gonna get rid of their jobs. And then they were certain that spreadsheets would get rid of their jobs. And then they thought online spreadsheets would get rid of their jobs. And in every case, you ended up with more accountants. We thought that ATMs would get rid of bank tellers. We have far more people working for banks now than we did when ATMs were introduced, and most of them are doing higher paid, more creative, more intellectually interesting jobs. So we're pretty good at responding to technology by creating jobs, but we have to do so in a way where we sort of guide, in my opinion, the economy in the right direction. There was a great line at the most recent AI summit in Paris where somebody was saying, during the Industrial Revolution, we didn't know we were going through a revolution. And there was a lot of negative side effects as a result, people in factories dying, et cetera. We actually sort of know that we're going through some form of great revolution or change right now. Where do we want it to go now that we have that power? Let's jump into the longer questions. Cheesan and I, as I said, on the board of the Canadian Club for a number of years. I left last year, 2 years ago. I was like in tears.
In tears. We miss you.
Like hosted an event last week that made me feel good to be back in the crew, but it was on behalf of my think tank, the dais, with the Canadian Club. Irrespective, you are now the president, we all knew that Cheesan was going to be eventually the president because she was by far the most influential person for the latter portion of my time there. And she's an influential person amongst a board that is made up of Toronto's most influential leaders in sort of business and politics and even the nonprofit sector. And in seeing how all of those folks are reacting to AI and automation, what are the trends you're seeing? What's rising to the surface?
Yeah. I think, the first is around trust and governance. Right? I think a lot of organizations are trying to figure out how to build in trust, build in models of governance in these early days. So when they scale, they are able to do it more quickly. We talked about that earlier, right? Efficiency is really critical when you are doing things that are growing and they're bigger. And I think, within that, there's a lot of danger around bias. There's a lot of danger around privacy. And so really mapping and understanding what those models look like early does two things. So the first is you're getting reps in on having those conversations because those governance conversations are going to be different. I think the second is that you are building that level of, that foundational level of understanding and of like that human to technology interaction, which we know, like risk is it's like fundamentally a human outcome, right? We take risks, we are like it is, and so figuring that out early is really important. I think the second is exactly what we were talking about here, your last question to Stewart, which is what are talent pipelines looking like, right? I think it's really easy. I think to your point, your conversation around the accountants and the calculators, we've certainly seen in previous industrial revolutions that there are certain crafts, certain industries, certain skills are taken over by new technology. And there's always this fear that we're going to have like a really high unemployment. I actually think that in the short term, we are going to see that. I mean, my kid is 15. He's going to come out in a couple of years. Who knows what the job market's going to look like for him? I've got a nephew who is, in his third year of university. his graduating class, like the kids coming out of his software engineering program in Waterloo, there is unemployment that is happening there because organizations are taking a beat. They're trying to figure out the exact question that you asked Stewart, which is why do we need to hire these analysts? I mean, we could just put agents in place. But I think the organizations, the companies that I'm seeing that are taking a really thoughtful approach are not just thinking about next year. They're not just thinking about what that budget looks like, but they are thinking about what is that long-term pipeline? Because you don't get these kids in now. 5, 10, 15 years from now, yeah, 7 generations, exactly. Your leaders are retiring. Where's your pipeline? You know, it's not there. And so, you know, I think that, there's just there's a balance, you know, short-term gain, long-term pain.
Totally. Another person who I didn't mention walked up from the audience and said, I know you from way back, knows me from the boot camp, the software boot camp that I founded. We created that boot camp 12, 13 years ago when Andreessen Horowitz was saying software is going to eat the world, and people were interpreting that as software developers will take over every job. And the boot camp went bankrupt 3-4 months ago after 12, 14 years. Why? Because we don't need nearly as many software developers, to your point. And in, you know, Bird is, I guess, likely that you're going to move some of those jobs, not fire them necessarily, but at least repurpose them for other things. I think that's a great example. A more complicated example, perhaps, than software developers, where I think it's very clear in the short term, at least we're going to need less, is the creative industries and advertising. And I think a lot of folks here are in advertising, and when you were talking about craft, it made me think of cottage industries and how during the last industrial revolution, so the idea of a cottage industry was created because places where large groups of people made all of their money shrank until they really became sort of artisans and craftsmen instead of producing something that was widely consumed. I don't see advertising going there. I do see other aspects of the creative sort of fields going there. But I'm curious, you know, to talk to somebody who's running one of the largest agencies in the world here in Canada. This line I really like. Somebody was like, creative directors aren't going to be replaced because prompting is basically the same thing as what a creative director does, except the creative director is sort of giving direction to humans in a team, whereas prompting is doing it to AI. How would you respond?
Yeah, look, I think you know, creative directors aren't going away, media directors aren't going away. I think you know, roles are changing. I think skill sets are changing for sure. I think the rhetoric and the talk about it is more vibrant right now than the changes that are happening. I think you know, people are slow to change, and I think we're doing our best to adopt the right tech and tools. There's a lot out there. I think every day someone's sending me a note saying, hey, have you seen this, or have you done this, or oh my goodness, we have to start training on that. So, you know, it is a lot. It's like a tsunami right now. But I think what can be replaced right now, at least until the robots get better, for our people is human judgment, right? What is the right thing to do versus the right thing you should do? I think that's, you know, creative judgment. I think that's human judgment that can't be replaced by other functions. I think emotional intelligence is part of our craft, right? At agencies and at in the marketing community. It's selling the idea, is understanding the nuances of feedback, what's not being said, and how to really interpret it. Like all of that humanity, as you develop a creative product, is, I mean, it's going to be super hard to replace. So that gives me some, you know, comfort. I do worry. I worry. You know, we have not, you know, let anyone go like you. I think we're probably growing faster than we're not. But I take it seriously. We have 1,000 employees across Canada. Every employee has a family, right? So it's responsibilities that we have to think about in our economy. We don't suddenly need to have high numbers of unemployment in Canada. That's not good for anybody. So it's supporting our people to grow their skill set, right, and to be there. So that's probably where I should have said I spend most of my time is thinking about that. I do think AI will help us in a lot of ways in creativity. I think it's going to help speed to concept. I mean, back to the fact that no one can wait longer than 20 minutes for pizza. Do you think clients can wait longer than, 5 days for a creative concept? Probably not anymore. Clients have in-house. I think that's going to be the first thing to fall is probably the in-house agencies. I think they're going to really adopt quickly and have AI do a lot of the creative work. I was talking to somebody the other day, they're like, oh yeah, I can just throw in like a couple concepts and I get like 5 ads spit it out. I'm like, oh, great. Like the race to the middle in mediocrity is going to be super fast, and then hopefully it pulls back to the reality of it. But I think, speed to concept, I think, mock-ups, language, I think personalization, like all of those areas in creativity and media, quite frankly, is going to be helped by AI. We just have to find the right platform to deliver the right support for us, because right now everybody's, vying to be the right platform for us to use. So I think that's kind of the dilemma right now.
I love how hopeful that is. And I think in terms of the hopefulness vis-a-vis specifically employment and unemployment, I would highly recommend folks look at the 2 Nobel Prize winners from this past year that nobody's quoting anymore because the banks and the big tech companies don't want you to look at what they said. But these guys, Esemoglu and Simon, both economists, won the prize for the same thing that our little think tank, which actually has more people who know labor markets than know AI or anything else, has been saying for a long time, which is the labor market is going to change really slowly. In software, in...
Gives me comfort.
Totally. In customer service, it might change faster. There's no question. But those are relatively small sectors if you just look at the entire labor market where everybody's working. And in consulting and in advertising and in the vast majority of fields, it's going to change pretty slowly, like point something %. It might even change slower in places like Canada, where we're the most risk averse of any country in the OECD. So if you actually look at the pace of change, and if the US is dominating it, that actually means we might be changing too slowly. I would say, like, if anything, we need to adopt more, not fire more people, but incorporate more of that tech into our work. Stewart, I'm going to go back to you, because I remember distinctly being in Spain, in Barcelona, for one of these global smart cities summits, and seeing Bird announced as the fastest growing Silicon Valley startup ever. And at that point, it wasn't AI that was creating that change. It was really that sort of your concept of changing how people are transported around a city, how a city is connected, how these sort of relatively simple devices could dramatically change how we all live. That had seized not just Silicon Valley, but the world of tech. Now AI seized the world of tech. How is an organization that was focused on transportation sort of building that in beyond, like, it's interesting, you said LLMs are being used to map where people are going. That's probably a recent change, right? Like, I heard LLMs have improved our ability to weather forecast more dramatically than any improvement over the past 50 years. Have you seen the same improvements?
Yeah, I mean, the history is important because, to your point, so I didn't start the company. I'm not obviously the founder. The business was started in Silicon Valley, as you said. And it was, at the time, the fastest growing startup ever. The revenue growth was crazy. They were launching in all these cities around the world, kind of taking cities by surprise. I think, and my relationship was I, met these guys that were running it, and long story short, was starting it in Canada, separately. And being a Canadian conservative type person, like most Canadians are, I was like, oh, okay, I don't want to buy, 200,000 of these things and like flood all our cities. I kind of want to see if they make money first, so maybe I'll put like 500 in Calgary and see what happens. Sure. So we were doing that, and we were making money because we were doing it in a sort of a slow, methodical kind of way, and the Americans were not. And there wasn't AI, and there wasn't the technology to do all that, and they ended up blowing $1 billion. And we used like single-digit millions, we're making money. So we ended up taking over the whole business. So it's kind of an interesting Canadian story where these Canadian people took over a much larger global US company because we were doing something, I guess, right, and they were doing something that was, I guess, right as well, but not bottom line correct.
How do we do that with like NVIDIA or Google?
So, yeah, I wish. Actually, when I was a kid, NVIDIA made gaming cards for computers. You guys remember all that? And ATI, which was based in Richmond Hill, was actually better than NVIDIA at making GPUs back then. You guys remember that? I don't know if anybody remembers that. It was bought by AMD, seeing some nodders right there. You know what I'm talking about. ATI was a way better company than NVIDIA. And if we could have kept that business, real smart guy ran it and sold it and probably made lots of money and moved somewhere else. But if we kept that side topic, but if that company had stayed Canadian, we would be right in there with NVIDIA. So he knows exactly what I'm talking about. But that was, ATI was better than NVIDIA, true story. It was based in Richmond Hill, like, you know, all over like Highway 7 and Yonge around there.
I did tech support at the Canadian Embassy in Washington as a 12-year-old, and I was putting those cards into government computers.
Yeah, like, so when you're buying like a Pentium back in the day, you wanted an ATI graphics card more than an NVIDIA one. The ATI ones are better.
We are so old and so
Old,
geeky.
but those were the first GPUs. And the reason why you needed a GPU is because you were graphics processing, because you were trying to play video games. That's what you needed the processing power for. Not for AI, you wanted them for video games, just for the record. So video games led to AI, just for the record.
That's true.
Little history of technology. Anyways, but long story short, AI has been huge because as we reformed this business that was growing, you know, fast but had no sense of profitability, we had to look at kind of what we had and had to use tools to make it a profitable business from a high growth one. And one of those tools became AI. To your point, we have this model now saying, okay, instead of just dumping, you know, 10,000 vehicles in Los Angeles and hoping a bunch of people ride them, we have to be smarter about that. We can't afford to keep, you know, putting more and more of these vehicles out there. We have to make sure we know where we're putting them and, you know, what's going to make, you know, you ride it versus somebody else. And in our business, unlike Uber and Lyft, is you come to us as opposed to we come to you. And your 20-minute pizza thing is a good analogy because I can't get people to walk more than 50 meters for one of our devices. You know, so it's very apt. So anyways, yeah, so AI has been huge for us for sure.
Super, super interesting because that is, like, I choose whether I ride Bird or the Lyft or other equivalent in a given city based on which one I see first.
I get I've literally asked this question of probably 500 riders, directly, and I said, why did you take, Lion is our slightly bigger competitor, and I'll be like, why did you take Lion over Bird? They typically say either one of two answers. It was right there, which is like 70% of the answer, and the 30% has already had the app, which are both convenient. So your point about the 20-minute pizza thing is really important. People want to have super convenience these days. They have no tolerance for inconvenience. So if Pizza still had 30-minute pizzas, I don't know if they still do, but if they still do, I haven't had a pizza in a long time, but if they still have 30 minutes, they're out of date. They got to get it down. That was like 1990s. They got to get it down to like 10 minutes.
So I'm going to switch gears in a really big way because what you were talking about was all about efficiency. And there was a 99% Invisible is one of my favorite podcasts, and for their 15th anniversary, they were talking about, he was asked, the host, if you were going to die on a hill about any given subject related to design, what would it be? And his first answer is, I don't want to die on a hill. And his second answer is, there isn't really anything because for me, design is all about having an open mind. But then he finally came to efficiency. He thinks right now efficiency is killing design and is sort of killing humanity in a way. And I do think we're going to hit a point where the pendulum begins to swing back and we sort of want to slow down. Not necessarily in transportation and how we get around, but this actually relates to dentsu in Japan because my wife is Japanese and I've been obsessed, embarrassingly, since I was like 12 with Japan. Probably relates to the gaming and the video game, et cetera. But like, I wish
where this is going.
I wish my mother had dissuaded me when I was going to prom and graduation from wearing a kimono because I had no ties to Japan at that point. And so there's like all my graduation pictures are of me in a kimono, which makes zero sense. But I eventually married a Japanese woman, so now it makes a little more sense. And the culture in Japan of slowing down and of aesthetics and of people and that relationship to ethics and aesthetics coming before efficiency is, I think, one of the things that's also created problems for their economy in the current world, and yet is also something that has resulted in dentsu doing so well all around the world because it balances sort of efficiency with humanity in a way that perhaps other agencies or cultures don't. Same one.
Yeah, I mean, they talk a lot about the Sanpo Yoshi, so good for society, good for business, and good for people. So that's something that we talk a lot about and how we try to approach business and in how we respect our people. Not always easy, but yeah, it's a different culture. I'm still learning it. I'm fairly new at dentsu. I think it's they can be slow to move, but boy, when they make up their mind, they're rapid fire. So it's they've got a balance. So I think Japan's going to figure it out. I think they're going to figure out their economy.
What are you bringing that you think, what is dentsu bringing to Canada that is resulting in you doing so well here? Because obviously you're all over this country in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I think, again, thoughtfulness. They're not quick to jump on, like back to what I was talking about earlier, there's there's 1,000 ways that we can approach AI and 1,000 partners we can work with, but it's about a thoughtful partnership. It's about doing what's right. It's about taking a beat to make sure that we're doing the right thing, not what we can do, but what we should do is a big part of the language that we're trying to bring into the teams. What you said earlier to open up this about the seventh generation, that's really resonant. We're not that good. I wish we were. I love that. I'm totally going to talk about that all the time now. I love it because I wish we would think about that more, right? About what's next and what impact are we making with the changes that we're doing. But look at AI is going to be critical to manage our business. Like we're stretched, we're pushed. Clients want more for less. That's always been a fact of life. That will never change. It's becoming more rampant. So we'll use AI to automate more. There's a lot of iterative tasks that we can just automate. We're a very data-heavy business. Lots of repetitive tasks. Things like competitive spend work, trends, audience insights, all of that kind of work can be automated. But I think, that's the easy stuff, right, to automate. It's what do you do with what you're getting? Because now we've got a lot. We've got a lot of data. We press a button, we've got everything we need. But now we need to train people to do something with it and tell a story. And what I worry about is storytelling. Like that's really, how do you teach that in this age, right? When kids have grown up, getting spoon-fed.
Absolutely, narrative. How important that is. I love that. I want to wrap on something a little bit more high level. I'm at a think tank now for a reason. I spend a lot of my time trying to elevate above a given issue and come up with the themes that cross cultures and cross industries and cross economies. And one of them that I've been focusing a lot on, it relates to Canadian-built chips, is around public AI. So this idea that we need a Canadian, but also just international alternative to 3 or 4 companies owning the most important technology in our lives. And it's really hard to do that. We're a really long ways away from anybody being able to compete with ChatGPT or NVIDIA or Google or Amazon. But there is a movement of folks trying to do that, and it actually entails like-minded countries, Japan and Canada, sharing infrastructure, sharing chips and technology, sharing software and know-how, etc. And that's, I think, one way of thinking about collaboration in order to create an alternative to being pulled in one direction without feeling you have any control. And so I wanted to ask, if we can project a more positive future, if we can do the opposite of the Margaret Atwood approach to dystopia and instead try to, from a sci-fi utopia, look to 2026 or even further, generations into the future, what would each of you, and we'll start with Cheesan, what trends do you see in 2026? What trends do you hope for in 2060?
Yeah, if I had to sort of pick one, I would say I'll go back to my first answer, which is just being really intentional and having clarity on what you're using tech for. And if you're using it beyond the efficiency play, how does it really integrate into your strategy? I think that is going to be key for organizations, because I think the best leaders, right? We're talking about leadership, we're talking about people. The best leaders have the clarity of understanding where they want to go, but the humility to know that they don't have all the answers. And so I think if that could be a 2026 kind of focus for leaders, that's what I'm saying.
Beautiful, thank you. Stewart.
look, I mean, we're talking in terms of AI or just in general? You're saying in AI. So, I mean, look, AI there's been a lot of bubbles, right? There's been I remember when there was a VR bubble. I mean, there's been a lot of different bubbles over the years, and sometimes the bubbles are legit, and sometimes they're not legit. I think most people would say that this bubble appears to be legit. The change, I mean, look, we can all say that. I mean, think about something as basic as internet search, right? A year ago, personally, I was using Google for all my internet searching. Now, I think I use Google 10% of the time. I use Perplexity, I'm using ChatGPT, and that is unbelievable, speed of change. So I think point number one is it's not a bubble, it's legit. I think Cheesan brought up an amazing point, which is you have to okay, that's great. We now know that it's not a bubble, but how are you being intentional about how it's going to impact your organization? That's the other part of it. And then three is I think we can't be afraid I think it's the point that you made, Jake. We can't be afraid of the future and say, well, it's going to, might impact jobs. Because I think you're right. I think too many people are so worried about the job impact that are worried about the job creating side of it and the benefits. I'll take an example. I mentioned autonomous vehicles before, and someone sent me a stat this morning. Now, I'm sure Waymo put the stat out, so bear with me. But it was oh, well, if more cities had Waymo, you'd have, an 8% increase in life expectancy in the U.S. Some ridiculous stat like that. Because so many people die from traffic accidents. Okay, so the reason, there's many good reasons why autonomous vehicles have been slowed and delayed and regulatory reasons, but ultimately, I mean, you do that, you're going to save a lot of lives. So that's a really good outcome.
3.5 weeks ago, I sat in a CT scan, saw the light, and agreed completely that if we could have less car accidents or bike accidents, this would be a much better world.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, there will be job changes for sure. I mean, you don't want to see a bunch of truck drivers out of work. That is not a good outcome for the economy. But you can't be so afraid there's a super good outcome in terms of lives being saved. So it's a tough walk to walk, but I think you make a very good point. I mean, I guarantee people were terrified of ATMs in 1980, whatever, when they came out, and it really meant nothing. Now, this is a little bit more of a seismic change, but still, you go down the list, you go into robotics, which is, I guess, really what AI is, a form of robotics. And there are so many human elements of robotics. And then, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts on robotics lately, and there's a lot of human plus robotic parts of it where you actually are creating a bunch of jobs because you can't just put a robot in an environment to do something. You really need that human, for not just the learning aspect, but also the interaction and the augmentation. So anyways, I think those are my 3 points. It's, okay, it's real. You got to be intentional, and you can't be so afraid of negative externalities that you ignore the positive externalities.
Brilliant, brilliant. I mean, I think I completely agree with all three. And the it's real one from a consumer standpoint, 100%. Number two, we haven't seen the enterprise use cases as of yet. And so it's that integration into our economy that's really going to probably create the change, but happen a lot more slowly. And then doing it intentionally, as Cheesan was saying, is probably, hopefully, the way we do that best. But brilliant. Wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with any of that, and that makes total alignment. I think the only add I would say is really getting intentional, I guess, on the areas that we're trying to solve for, specifically for next year, right? So, because again, you can chase everything, unicorns and rainbows, and we're chasing everything, but what exactly are the problems we're trying to solve for? Let's get real and practical, because that also shows people the way, right? And it takes some of the fear out of it. It's okay, this is the gap that we have right now. Automation or AI or whatever, or heaven forbid humans can solve that, what we're trying to fix. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of shows the way and you build from there. So I think getting really intentional about those, about what are the problems, what are the gaps, what are we solving for, and then moving forward and getting real on it.
I love it. Intentionality, getting real. Thank you all for joining us today. Let's continue the conversation over coffee and food at the back. And thank you to Janice and Mantis for hosting, and to Blabla's for hosting in this incredible venue. So yeah, thank you all. Thank you.